Okay, you can be a really irritating person. Or on the other hand, you can come up to somebody and say, oh, it's really nice to see you. And, oh, what is that cologne you're wearing? That's disgusting. I mean, there are any number of little ways that we are irritants, pricks to each other. That didn't sound right. That isn't going to make it. Thorns, thanks, Cindy. Thorns. Yeah, we can be thorns to each other. Yes. So anyhow, we'll move on, I think. So as we can be thorny to each other, that's the point that the prophet Isaiah is making the people of Israel in that day. You have been given all of the wonderful benefits of bearing fruit with your life. And the question becomes, do you take full advantage of that and recognize it first of all, and then practice that which you have been given in the way of fruit, or are you just a thorn? Not just in your own flesh, but in everybody else's. And Isaiah makes a further promise as the prophet that God is going to tend the vineyard. And if there are people who are unable to make good fruit bear out of those vines, then he will pull other people in to be people who work the vineyard and also bear fruit. Now, just so you know, he's also talking about you and I. And if you miss that, you really miss pretty much the whole thing. Jesus updates that with a parable in the vineyard. And what he's talking about there is very simply that in that whole parable story about the owner of the vineyard and the people who are working the vineyard and the representatives who are going to collect the produce of the vineyard, all of them have a role to play in the caring for the vineyard, because they are all people who in one fashion or another are bearing fruit or are trying to bear fruit. Right? All of you who work for companies, corporations, recognize that every company is trying somehow to bear fruit, and everybody who works in it is trying to be a bearer of fruit. The question becomes, and this is where the prophets come in and why Jesus told the parable of the vineyard this way. He has one group come in and they get killed. Another group comes in and they get killed by the workers. The son comes in, with reference obviously to Jesus, and he gets killed. The question becomes how much of a prophet you are and how you perceive your local conditions. And this is one of the master messages in this parable. How do you recognize whether things are going well or not? And what role do you play in that? The prophets were always asking the question of communities and of people of faith, as I will ask this now of you. As a prophet and as a follower of Jesus, do you recognize in the course of a day who's doing lousy? Just having a lousy life. Maybe for a day, maybe for a week. Just a lousy life. Do you recognize people as you go through the day who are hungry? Literally hungry. Are you able to recognize people, and I'll use the metaphor here as the Bible does, of widows and orphans? We're not talking, they don't always talk specifically about widows and orphans as widows and orphans, but they use that as a metaphor for people who are feeling outside of the normalcy of life, the absence of things in their lives, a hole in their life somehow that can't get filled up. Do you recognize people like that when you run into them? You see, that's all the work of the Holy Spirit in and present within you, where you're able to recognize the people who live on the margins, so to speak, of the mainstream of life. And that is what the prophets and what Jesus was always teaching, that your calling is to recognize that there are people in life, people that you know who are just having a bad time and having a bad day. And in the midst of that badness of the days, do you recognize the changes that are going to be required to move a sense of hopelessness, isolation, and loneliness to a sense of belonging, of participation, of hopefulness about a future different than the one that exists now? And that's not so easy to do. First of all, it takes time, and it is time-consuming. For another, you have to be observant and take a look at your surroundings to see what's going on. And it isn't always so easy to keep up with all the changes that are going on in life. You know, I had to change my credit card because of Home Depot. You know, and now all of the, you know, there are now 10 banks, not just the one bank. JP Morgan, there's 9 others that haven't reported yet. Oh yeah, that'll be in the paper soon enough, so God bless you all. We'll all be there. The question becomes, the kind of complexities of changes that occur in our lives really can cause strife and issues just of time and trustworthiness and everything that goes with that, until you make the changes in your card and get a new one. And now I have a new PIN number, and I should probably tell you, all of you, my PIN number, so that if I forget and I see you at a Mac machine, you can remind me what it is. So here it is right now. I'm kidding. But yeah, you know, I've given up trying to memorize it. You know, because just the complexities of things can just get to you. And it's just the way of living today. The question becomes, are you able to recognize, there's a lot of people in our culture who can't keep up. And if you don't recognize that part of our cultural and social change, you're really missing a lot of the people who are isolated, lonely, alienated, and just having bad day after bad day because they really can't keep up for whatever reason. Call it education, call it lack of food in youth, biological, emotional issues, whatever it may be. There is so much going on in the world around us. And what Jesus is simply saying in the parable today, and what Isaiah, the prophet, was talking about, is part of our calling is to recognize all of the changes and to be very astute cultural observers of what's going on around us. So that at the times and the occasions when you can see that somebody is yelling, ouch. And I was reading an ugly little short story by Harlan Ellison, the title of it being, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. I know a lot of people like that, and so do you. But you see, that's our calling as people who are tending the vineyard of God, the world in which we live, His creation. We tend the vineyard by recognizing the people who are being left behind, left out, not feeling up to snuff, not feeling up to speed, feeling overwhelmed by all of the different stuff that's going on. And your call and I are to tend those people in the vineyard as part of the vine of Christ, so that they too can bear fruit. Let me give you a simple example here. A lot of us are married, right? Yes, and everybody is happily married. All right, for the most part. My wife loves me. What are you laughing for? That is not funny. You don't have to think about that yet. No, think about when you get married, you can go at it 2 ways. You can marry somebody and say, I'm going to change them. Oopsie. No. See, when this minister hears that, we then have conversation. Because the whole function of companionship is you are in companionship with the other for the sake of the other, so that they can mature and grow and flourish. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, you understand exactly what I'm saying. That is how God invites us to tend the vineyard, so that we can care for the other in whatever fashion we're called upon to do and are capable of doing, in order for them to become who they are. And they probably don't know who they are. I know I have many conversations with a lot of people in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are saying, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. Well, God bless you all, because I say the same thing, because life is so interesting and so open and so wide and varied. You really don't know, because it's so interesting and there's so many opportunities. It's a wonderful way to approach life. What do I want to be? Well, I don't know. I'm this now, but hey, this is where you need people who are going to love you for your own sake. Not for their sake, for what they can get, but for the sake of the other. So that they can flourish and have time and grow and mature. So you're getting the idea right of the vineyard. We're tenders of the vineyard of God's good creation and God's good world. And we do it for God's sake and for the sake of the people for whom we care, so that they can mature and grow in whatever ways that's going to happen. I have to tell you about a monk. Just have to, since we don't have any monastery hymns today. Sorry, I didn't put any in. But John Chrysostom, the 4th century, a Byzantine monk and head of the church in Constantinople of that day, said that based on the prophets and on Jesus' teachings through the parables, he said that a good way for you to lead your life as a Christian in the vineyard, cultivating and tending that vineyard garden, is to ask the question and to recognize that the voice of the poor for food and water and the poor in spirit are the voice of God. So that they can trigger for you your gifts of the Spirit in order to tend that piece of the garden. And you do it by means of detective work, by means of conversation, by means of getting to know people, the relational aspects of things which we're losing the skills in doing these days. But for Christians, it's an important skill to have. But that's the gift that we bring to the world. And it's the gift that you bring with you to work, to your family, to your friends, to your neighborhood, wherever you are. You are a tender of a vineyard. And what you're looking for is the bearing of fruit in people's lives. Now, that's pretty good news that you carry with you every day. And it's the good news that Christ preached to the people then and preaches to us today. We bear fruit because we have a tender of the vineyard who loves us dearly and wants us to flourish.